Tell me about your mother's inheritance. I was deeply shocked by Jake's words. After my mother's funeral, without offering any condolences, he directly asked me that question. Probably because he saw me checking the passbook. He was expecting the inheritance to be transferred. Unbelievable, so thoughtless. I think it was about $600,000. $600,000. Is that all? Well, even after taxes, a substantial amount will still remain, right? Although I replied hesitantly, Jake grinned and mumbled to himself upon hearing it. That eerie smile gave me an unpleasant feeling. Anyway, I don't plan to let things go according to Jake's intentions. The next day, it seemed Jake had already started to act on his plans. However, his naive plan would eventually backfire on him. Jake seemed completely oblivious to this. I am Emma. My husband Jake is a company employee, 5 years older than me. We met through an arranged marriage when I was 20. Jake is the eldest son in his family. Robert, the second son, seems to have been estranged since he graduated from university. Therefore, Jake was practically an only child. It seems the in-laws doted on him quite a bit. To be honest, I never really wanted to marry Jake, but my family has been business people for generations. Raised as the privileged daughter, I couldn't go against my parents' wishes. Jake, too, was destined to take over the family business his father runs, so he had no choice but to choose me. Our marriage wasn't one built on love. By societal standards, our marriage was far from what one would call a happy one. Furthermore, we couldn't have children. We married young, and I couldn't give up the hope of having a child, thinking that if only we could have one, our lives might improve. But even after undergoing fertility treatment, our situation didn't change. You barren woman! Finish the cleaning quickly! At first, my in-laws treated me kindly. But a few years later, they began to call me barren and became cold towards me. Hospitals are just waste of money. Shouldn't you be able to do what needs to be done? My father-in-law used to throw sarcastic remarks at me almost daily. However, even knowing this, Jake never took my side. While I endured the harsh words from my in-laws, Jake'd be reading the newspaper or taking a nap. It seemed he didn't care at all. I wanted to escape the house and even propose working, but all he said was, "What? You want people to think I would become a full-time housewife." However, the times when I was alone with my mother-in-law were absolute hell. No one was on my side. I didn't want to worry my parents by telling them, and since it was a marriage connected through work, I couldn't just run away. Yet, I held on to the hope that one day I would be happy and endured every day. However, no matter how much time passed, the situation didn't improve. 20 years have passed since our marriage. When I was approaching my 40s, my father-in-law died in an unexpected accident. Due to this event, it was revealed that his company had been evading taxes. With the back taxes and fines, our wealth disappeared, and the company went bankrupt in no time. The large life insurance policy we had taken out on my father-in-law was gone too. Only the house remained, but our once prosperous lifestyle became a distant memory. I was worried that it might be hard for Jake, who was 45 at the time, to find a new job. But fortunately, my parents helped. Thanks to my parents' introduction, Jake managed to find a new job, while my mother-in-law seemed to age significantly overnight and became almost catatonic. She seemed so incapacitated that she couldn't even throw sarcastic remarks at me, and soon after she suffered a stroke and became dependent on care. In this situation, I couldn't even consider getting pregnant. I was already 40. I had heard given up in my heart, but it was at the time that I truly gave up on the idea of getting pregnant. Jake acted as if it was natural for me to take on all the caregiving, and on his days off, he would just laze around like he used to. "Hey Jake, could you help with taking care of your mother on your days off?" I mustered the courage to tell him my true feelings. If he could help with just one meal on his days off, it would alleviate so much of my burden. However, Jake replied grumpily, "What? I work hard outside. Let me relax on my days off." Jake doesn't understand what my life is like. After all, I don't have anything like a day off. My parents became concerned for me and told me to come back home. But if I went back to my parents' home, what would happen to my mother-in-law? We only have in-home care once a week, and daily care would be prohibitively expensive. It wouldn't be possible in this house. I had been ridiculed and taken advantage of for a long time, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon my mother-in-law. Gradually, Jake started to go out from morning even on his days off. It seems he felt uneasy under my gaze when he lays around at home. My wife complains even if I just relax at home on my days off. Apparently, he's been spreading such rumors to the neighbors. Meanwhile, Jake enjoys his days off, going to space alone. Of course, the neighbors know that my mother-in-law requires care. Yet, he speaks as if he is advertising the fact that he's dumping all the caregiving on me. He probably doesn't care how he appears in others' eyes. My mother-in-law, who adored Jake, seemed depressed to realize that not only did her son not help with her care, but he also kept his distance from her. "Jake's absence is your fault." Sometimes I would get such snide remarks. But when I responded, "Should I leave?" she would fall silent. This kind of life continued for 20 years. When my mother-in-law left for my father-in-law, my long caregiving life finally came to an end. I will soon turn 60. My feelings for Jake have disappeared, but I have come to terms with many things. It seems difficult to leave this house now, and honestly, I thought I'd grow old here. Jake seems to have worked very hard at his job. Because of his dedication, even after retirement, he is still working as senior staff. Thanks to that, it's true that we can make ends meet. Our marital relationship is not good, but I am grateful for that. Although our marriage isn't going well, Jake doesn't seem to have any intention of kicking me out. He probably isn't thinking about it anymore. Jake still often leaves the house on his days off, so I enjoy some moments of freedom. Recently, I started a new hobby, pottery. At this age, I've made new friends, and these are the happiest days since I got married. However, Jake didn't seem to like it. One day, he yelled, "I'm working hard, and you're just having fun." The entire bag containing my pottery equipment was burned in the yard. Were materials for pottery and my personal items. By the time I put out the fire, everything was burned to a crisp. I was really upset by his actions. I thought I had come to terms, but our journey ahead is still long. The word divorce crossed my mind. However, as I was contemplating divorce, another tragedy struck. Both of my parents passed away suddenly. My father died unexpectedly, and after his funeral, my mother collapsed and passed away too. The sudden event left me devastated. My brother William took over my father's business, but after the funerals, He was bedridden for about a week. He was probably mentally exhausted. My pottery friends reached out with concern, but Jake still said sarcastically, "How long are you going to stay in bed? Did I lay in bed like that when my mother died? Even though you don't work, you are exaggerating." What Jake said might not be wrong, but it's not what he should say to a wife grieving the loss of her parents. Still, the next day, I forced myself out of bed and returned to my regular life. It seems it would take some time before I can enjoy my hobbies again, but Jake seemed satisfied that our daily life was back. Some time had passed since my mother's funeral, and I remembered that payment deadline for the funeral was approaching. I was checking my bank book. William was busy with work, so I was in charge of the payment. Without knowing this, Jake approached me with a vulgar grin as I looked at the bank book. "How much inheritance did you get from your mother?" I was genuinely shocked by his words. He hadn't said a word of comfort to me since the funeral, and now this. He probably thought I was checking the inheritance in the bank book, but his insensitivity was too much. I answered absent-mindedly. "About $600,000, I think." $600,000. Less than I thought, but even after taxes, a few $100,000 should remain. A considerable amount, huh? Jake mumbled that, wearing a sickening grin. I don't know what he was thinking, but I won't let things go his way. I silently put away the bank book. Even Jake seemed to catch on the mood when I didn't respond. "Go to bed early tonight. You must be tired too." He probably sensed the awkward atmosphere and surprisingly offered comforting words. After such behavior, it's too unpleasant. With a strong desire to avoid seeing Jake, I headed to my room early that night. But the next day, an unexpected event occurred. Jake, as usual, went to work after breakfast. However, I received a notification that he hadn't shown up for work. I was shocked. This was the first time since we got married. I worried that he might have been involved in an accident and hastily tried calling him. But the phone never connected. While frantically searching the house, I understood everything the moment I entered the living room. There was a piece of paper on the table. It was a divorce notice, already filled out in Jake's part. Thinking it was impossible, I checked the drawer where I had placed my bank book the day before. As I suspected, the bank book was completely gone. What's going on? I sighed in disbelief. It was clear that Jake didn't get involved in an accident or crime. He disappeared on his own. I had noticed him rustling around in the living room this morning, and now I finally understood his motive. He probably intends to abandon me and start a new life on his own. I was certain that Jake hadn't kicked me out of the house because he had an eye on my parents' inheritance. The fact that he stole the bank book and fled was undeniable proof. But I remained calm. There was no need to panic. I carefully read through the divorce papers and rushed to the city court. Jake brought this upon himself. He has to be responsible for his actions, and I'll make sure he knows that. I also contacted Jake's company. I haven't been able to reach him, and the calls don't go through. It seems it wasn't an accident. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I will let him know to contact you as soon as I get in touch with him. I explained our situation. His colleagues were understanding, saying, "We're marked today as paid leave, so don't worry." I felt envious of Jake for having such a supportive workplace. That company, originally introduced by my father, was a place I hoped Jake would commit to. But it's no longer my concern. After that, I successfully got divorced from Jake. To think I was liberated from the life I endured for decades so easily. If I had made this decision earlier, my life might have been completely different. As I was packing my things at home, my mobile rang. It was Jake, who hadn't answered no matter how many times I'd called. I knew what he'd say before answering the phone. I ignored the ringtone and continued packing. But the calls from Jake were incessant. He even called the landline. Though I knew it was Jake calling, I reluctantly decided to answer due to his persistence. Hello? As I answered the phone as usual, I heard a frantic Jake exclaiming, "Emma! This isn't the time to talk about that." Jake didn't seem to be listening to what I was saying at all. With a loud voice, Jake interrupted me, looking extremely flustered. "I can't withdraw money from my mother's bank book." I couldn't help but laugh. Did he just realize now? Those were the only words that came to my mind. It seems he didn't notice anything since he hastily stole the bank book and ran away. Well, of course. You burned it the other day, remember? What? Didn't you know? I put it in the bag for my pottery class. I replied with a chuckle, holding back my laughter. I could tell from the other end of the phone that Jake was completely flustered. Then, what about this bank book? You burned your mother's bank book with no money in it? I don't know. After my mother-in-law passed away, I told Jake multiple times to handle the paperwork. Because when I went to the bank, they told me I couldn't process anything since I was in the air. So, I left the bank book, which only had a few dollars in it, untouched. Naturally, it remained stored in the same place. You've gotta be kidding! Didn't I tell you to sort out mom's stuff properly? You said you'd take care of it, didn't you? Don't you remember? Don't blame others. Enough! So, what should I do with this bank book? Unless I go and handle the procedures, there's nothing you can do to my mother's bank book. Hearing that, Jake kept mumbling complaints. I didn't feel like replying. Then, Jake went back to the bank counter and started explaining something. I'm sorry, but it seems I accidentally burned my mother's bank book. Can I somehow handle this? I have my wife on the phone too. I wonder if he had it on speaker because I could hear the bank clerk's troubled voice. One thing he said caught my attention. What are you talking about, Jake? We're strangers. There's no way you can handle the procedures. What? You remember the divorce papers, right? They were successfully accepted. Thanks for proving everything. Goodbye. I conveyed just that and hung up. I'm sure the bank clerk heard me. Imagining the look on Jake's face, whether he was shocked or angry, was quite entertaining. I should leave here before Jake comes back. I quickly packed my things. And then, I left the house where I had lived for many years. I was heading to my parents' house, which had become vacant after they passed away. Actually, I was set to inherit the family home. My mother, who ran a company, had assets worth over $8 million. But since I didn't have children and didn't want Jake to spend it recklessly, I only inherited $600,000 for living expenses. The rest was from the family home and the items stored in it. This included my mother's dresses and my father's antiques. After having them appraised, I inherited valuable items as mementos. Of course, this was after discussing it with my brother, William. William, who had married and had children, took over the company, but he was worried about the family home becoming vacant. So, he was grateful that I could manage the family home and he could inherit the cash. Thus, with our discussions, the inheritance process went smoothly without any disputes. When I safely arrived at my family home, I reported the divorce and my move to my brother over the phone.
Thank you. If Emma stays at our parents' home, I will feel relieved. But a divorce. Were you okay with that?
Yes, we couldn't have children, and both our parents have passed away. He seemed to feel the same way. So it's for the best. I can finally live my own life. I have absolutely no regrets. William seemed worried that I'd be all alone. But if I am to spend my life as Jake's servant, it's far better to be divorced. Besides, spending my final moments in the beloved house I lived in with my family before marriage, there's no greater happiness. After that, I received several calls from Jake on my cell phone. However, he never seemed to think that I might be at my parents' home, so he never came over. That day, as always, I enjoyed my alone time. The house felt a bit lonely without a family, but I've never felt so at ease before. The next day, I left the house with a heavy heart to make a bank transfer. The bank book required for the transfer was with Jake. I didn't want to go to that house, but I targeted the early morning when Jake will likely be asleep to retrieve the bank book. As soon as I entered the house, the smell of alcohol greeted me from the open door. I almost stopped in my tracks, thinking, "Oh no." When I went to the living room, empty beer cans were scattered everywhere. Father, when I look at the table, no matter how hungry they might be, I gathered the torn bank book, stuffed it into my bag, took a few pieces of clothing, and returned home. After that, I headed to the bank to transfer the money. As I approached the entrance, someone called out to me.
Emma!
"Oh, Jake?" Turning around, there was Jake, apparently having been waiting for me.
I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd be here.
"What does that have to do with you?"
Don't be so cold. We've been married for so many years, right?
Even though we're already divorced, he had the nerve to say that. I ignored Jake's words and went into the bank. However, Jake kept trying to charm me, staying by my side the entire time. And then it happened.
Jake! Emma!
Suddenly, someone called out to us.
Robert, why are you here?
It was Jake's younger brother, Robert. Meeting Robert here was unexpected and surprising. We had mostly cut ties with Robert, only seeing him at funerals. Over the 40 years since our marriage, including funerals, we'd only met Robert about 3 times. It seemed Robert wanted to sever ties on his own, but our in-laws didn't want people to know they were estranged from their son. They insisted he show up for major events. He likely recognized us because we'd seen each other a few years ago at their mother's funeral.
I came for mother's inheritance. I was about to call you both after checking the balance. Mother's inheritance.
Jake's eyes gleamed with interest. I was also surprised. I thought her inheritance was just a few $1,000s, but according to Robert, there were investment trusts and a safety deposit box that father-in-law had rented. Robert had heard about this from his mother before they became estranged. Before she passed away, she asked Robert to handle things if necessary. He'd been too busy until now to take care of it.
So, you see...
Robert looked at us with a hint of hesitation.
What is it? In the safe deposit box, along with some jewels, there was a letter. Mom said that she was leaving all her inheritance to you, Emma. What? What do you mean?
Hearing Robert's words, I was deeply shocked. Jake seemed even more stunned than I was. Ignoring our reactions, Robert put out the mentioned letter from the photo of compiled document. I recognized the envelope. It was the one I bought for her some time ago. On it, written in shaky letters, was, "All the jewels and assets in the safe deposit box will be inherited by my daughter-in-law, Emma." It was clearly written in the handwriting of my mother-in-law. So, this is what she was diligently writing back then. "Would you like me to mail this for you?" I had once asked her, but she coldly replied,
"It's none of your business."
I couldn't help but cover my mouth in disbelief.
"It must have been hard for you, Emma, taking care of her alone. She apologized for being so nasty all the time. She probably thought Jake would dismiss this if she told him, so she might have wanted me to handle the formalities."
When I looked at Jake's face, he was shaking with rage.
"I wasn't planning on inheriting since I'm in this state, but as an heir, I thought I should at least complete the procedures. Emma will just become the official heir. There shouldn't be any issues, right?"
Robert spoke nonchalantly. He didn't know that we were divorced. Shortly after, I was called to the counter. As for Jake, he seemed too drained to follow. Although there shouldn't have been any more business for him, he slouched heavily in the lobby. I reissued the bank book and completed all the procedures to change the funeral payment.
"Well, I'll be going now. I'll be in touch."
Saying that, I left, leaving behind Robert and Jake, who remained seated. Later, I received a call from Robert. Jake had apparently been causing a fuss, saying the letter was invalid, but he seemed to have been persuaded by Robert, saying, "Just do as Mom wanted." Jake still wasn't satisfied and even went for a free consultation with a lawyer. While the letter from my mother-in-law wasn't a formal will, Jake was persuaded by the lawyer and finally agreed to inherit the house. It seems the investment trust wasn't that large, so Jake reluctantly gave up. Following the wishes in the letter, I became the heir to the inheritance.
"Wait! If you get my mother's inheritance, doesn't that mean I should get my mother's in-laws?"
Jake apparently said this to the lawyer, but this matter and that matter are completely different. Just imagining it is too embarrassing. Even though the lawyer stopped him, Jake, unable to accept the outcome, found out I was at my parents' house and came over.
"It was all my fault. Let's start over from the beginning."
Realizing he had no more means to get the property, he knelt at the entrance, hoping for our remarriage, things so thoughtlessly. For the first time, I spoke out what I'd been wanting to tell Jake for a long time. Jake, unable to respond, just remained silent. At this point, he finally seemed to regret. I couldn't help but smile. "At least you could inherit the house, huh? By the way, you did contact your company, right? If you want money that bad, work hard and make sure you don't lose your job." I said that and closed the front door. It's all over now. In my bank book, there's an inheritance left to me by 2 mothers. With this, I believe I can live comfortably until the end. Jake continued to be despondent, forgot to contact his workplace, and apparently ended up getting fired. I did tell him, working hard was his only redeeming quality. What does Jake have left now? Perhaps acting superior to me and maintaining his own dignity were the only things fueling Jake's work motivation. With me gone and no hope for the inheritance, he probably felt he had nothing left. He's the person I've been with as a spouse for 40 years, so I'm somewhat concerned about his future, but that's it. I don't feel the slightest urge to help him out.
"Emma, my apologies for causing trouble with my family."
Robert was the only one who apologized for everything up to now. He also said,
"You can completely cut ties with my brother now."
Robert realized from a young age that his family was abnormal, and he left home early, avoiding any involvement with them. So now he seems to be living happy. Jake seems to have become a recluse since then, but he should be able to get by as he's eligible for a pension. He has the nerve to tell me to start over. I think he should just start over on his own. After everything settled down, I decided to go back to my previous pottery class. My friends from the pottery class were all happy to see me again. And I never thought that enjoying my own life without worrying about anything could be this much fun. I also had a wonderful encounter in the pottery class. I'd say no to getting married again, but maybe it's happier to spend time with someone who loves you rather than being alone forever. There are many things I now think it's too late for, but I learned during my divorce that it's never too late in life. There's no such thing as too late for anything. I believe you can find happiness no matter how old you